We will move through the agenda and then go to closed session on items 1 through 6. Colleagues, if we can consent on items 8, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 20.
I have one question on 8.
Okay, we'll hold 8.
18 and 20.
Okay, so we can get a consent on 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 20.
I'm not going to let Joy out of here that easy.
Okay. That agreed?
Fine.
Okay. Let me ask on item 14, it deals with the AEG 1 million. I understand there's other funds that have been collected through individual contributions that the city has placed in a file or a holding position. Let me ask the city clerk to come up because we'd like to move those monies at the same time as this action.
Yes, we're just clarifying that since the event happened last year, miscellaneous donations have arrived in the total amount of $43,000, $43,618.04. It's currently we deposited it, and it's in account F001 Fund 51K, but we don't have authority to spend it, only deposit it. So if you want that money to be released, it would take an action by this committee recommending to council that that money be spent.
Okay, if it's okay, colleagues, if we move that 44,000 to the along with the 1 million to be used in the same fashion as the 1 million.
And I think for clarification purposes, certainly if we could use that 43,000, have it reimbursed the general fund for those expenses.
Okay,
That would be
is
perfect.
that what the bulk of the 1 million is going for?
That's correct.
Okay, so we would put this 1,044,000 that will be going on this action, and I believe there's an additional 300,000 that's going to be dealt with differently. That will go directly to the police foundation. Okay, so
Thank you.
it's 1,044,000 and change.
Okay.
So we'll move that for item 14, and if you, June, if you get that language, so we can put it in the committee report to have the correct account numbers. And also on item 20, that's consent, if we could ask, we will not address it here, but we'll ask the CAO to be prepared to do a presentation in council as it relates to that particular report and make the comparisons as it relates to the city of LA and these other cities. So we'll just ask for that to occur during council. So that we'll move those items with those specific directions on 14 and 20. Colleagues, if we do not have any questions on specific cases on 13, we can also move that on consent, or if you have any specific or questions as to the allocation of the funds.
The 13 is on the outside council item.
Pardon?
Is on the outside council
If
expenditure.
there's
Yeah.
specific cases that they want to talk about, we can deal with that in closed session. Otherwise, we will, again, we could move that on consent. If there's no items as it relates to dollars.
It's just a note and file anyway, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So,
Okay, move that?
yeah.
Okay, so we'll move item 13 also on consent, because there's no specifics regarding the case. And then on that item, if we can just ask the clerk to get with the, involved with the CAO and ensure that the funds that are identified for proprietary department CRA are being reimbursed to the general fund, are being paid for by those departments or reimbursed. Okay. All right, so we'll go for items 1 through 6. So we'll recess for those items. Where we had the outside counsel, could we just add a couple of instructions? We had the one that dealt with the, ensure that the CRA and proprietary departments are reimbursing. Also, could we get with the city attorney and give us some analysis of a couple of year comparison as to what we're spending now over this same period of, was it July 1st through April 30th? So we can get a couple of year comparison. And then also, if we could ask, put a request that the mayor's office in addressing the 3 proprietary departments, that we see if there's a plan to assist them in reducing their outside counsel costs. Okay, next item.
Okay, next item is item 7, Office of Finance report on the following Exhibit H instructions that's approved as part of the 2010-11 adopted budget. First one, requests the city attorney with the assistance of the Office of Finance to prepare and present the necessary amendments to the respective ordinances to create a voluntary disclosure program on a test pilot basis to encourage unregistered businesses to initiate contact with the Office of Finance in order to resolve unreported and delinquent tax liabilities. And the next one is request the city attorney work with all impacted city departments to prepare and present the necessary amendments to the respective ordinances to implement a 90-day citywide non-tax amnesty program in fiscal year 2010-11.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Whitmore from the Office of Finance. For a quick update, I know you wanted some information about both these programs. We've done some significant efforts and research regarding the voluntary disclosure program, and a full report will be coming forward to the Jobs Committee.
Could you explain just for the public and what the voluntary disclosure program entails?
Basically, the voluntary disclosure program is a program for businesses that have been operating within the city limits without a business tax registration certificate. So basically what this is an opportunity for them to come forward in terms of the number and identifying the number of years they've been in business and the liability associated with that they would voluntarily resolve any existing liabilities.
Okay, so that would be from not only the back business tax, but the penalties and the interest would be all part of that discussion? Or would all that be waived, or what does that encompass?
Well, the details of the program have not been finalized, but my understanding is that they would all be included in that.
Okay. And so that's something that's coming, when would we expect that report?
That report, for the most part, has been completed. I believe it just needs to be scheduled for the upcoming committee, and that would be within the next couple of weeks, I believe.
Okay, very good. All right. Is this item also being discussed by the PTAC, or is that outside of their purview?
Mr. Parks, I apologize. That I am not aware of.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Colleagues, any questions on 7A? Okay, go to 7B.
And then 7B has to do with the amnesty program that has been proposed. As you're aware, we had a very successful amnesty program for business tax accounts a year or so ago. And what we're doing is moving forward with an amnesty for non-business tax accounts. We have been working diligently with the city attorney as to how we best can implement this. A couple of concerns have been raised relative to a formal amnesty program and having to go through a department by department changing of ordinances. We've got a tentative agreement that we can move forward with those accounts that have been already referred to our outside collection agencies. So we are in discussion with them as to how we can implement that as quickly as possible. But in terms of the actual ordinances on a department by department basis, I can let you know that we have been in touch with the departments through our Revenue Management Committee. We issued a survey with departments about their ability to cooperate with this, what type of accounts would be associated with the amnesty program, and what ordinances, if any, would need to be enacted or amended in order to make those accounts available. So We are still working with the departments to get a final count, if you will, of the applicable accounts. And in our contacts with the city attorney as well, we're trying to get some more definitive information as to what exactly would be required.
Okay. When you report back on that item, is it going to be incorporated in your quarterly accounts receivable report? Is that?
There is some verbiage in there that quarterly report was recently issued, and we don't give a definitive breakdown, but we certainly can do a supplemental report that can provide that information.
But I mean, is this item dealing with non-tax amnesty part and parcel of the accounts receivable report? Or separate, totally separate?
No, it would be in the same universe of accounts that are included in the report.
There's one thing in reading although it's not on the agenda, but reading your June 22nd report, although you comment throughout that some of the data is dated because of a prior audit, if it's anywhere close today, what this report reflects is departments have just ignored their responsibility to collect funds. And so the real issue is we need to bring that June 22nd report to committee in any information that's updated. So we're not dealing with basically charging departments for their non-compliance if they're not in non-compliance. But we need to bring that to committee as quickly as possible, because this whole issue of collecting revenue is very valid concern. And if departments aren't complying with, Executive Director 5, if they're not complying and they're not assisting you in collecting funds, then that's a major issue. And it appears we need to get that house in order before we even talk about a tax amnesty, a non-tax amnesty, because we may be able to collect money if people paid attention to them and they wouldn't fit in the amnesty area. So that's something that we could ask Ray and Nick if we can get that June 22nd report scheduled, and if we can ask the finance to give us enough as best information and as current information as possible, so we know where the deficiencies are within departments, and then we can then move farther onto the non-tax amnesty program once we get a better sense of what departments are doing.
Your point is very well taken, and we'll make sure that the information that we've accumulated will update that as quickly as we can.
So how long would you need to update that June 22nd report?
Part of it is still dependent upon responses by departments.
The same departments that are non-responsive in collecting debts.
And we have, in fact, followed up not only with emails, but direct telephone calls and trying to get updated information. So we will continue that again in the coming week, just to make sure that we get as much as we can.
Give us the timeline. Do we need a couple of weeks, 30 days?
Difficult for me to say, but let's say 30 days.
Okay. We can ask that we could schedule this within 30 days on their June 22nd report, and then we can bring back 7B at that time.
Yeah, no, I think it would be good. I mean, certainly the budget assumed about $2 million from the non-tax amnesty program, so.
That was the point I was just going to ask, Mr. Chairman. How much money are we looking at trying to get out there that we still haven't gotten, that you haven't gotten the cooperation with?
We have been, if you're talking about specifically related to the amnesty.
Yeah. Well, give me the overall first and then the amnesty second.
If you're talking about in terms of total outstanding accounts receivable throughout the city at this point, I believe it's about $541 million, if I remember correctly.
$541 million.
Yes.
Okay. And then when you take out what? Medical?
EMS accounts for the fire department.
Fire department.
It's about $150 million, I believe. Mm-hmm.
And then what's another big chunk?
Another big chunk would be DOT, the Department of Transportation, and their traffic citations.
And getting that money back. Golly, how much money are we talking about in traffic citations?
And again, that one is in excess of $100 million.
Golly, can I stay with that a little bit? Does somebody here from DOT help us on that, or are you able to tell us how long has it been outstanding, what kinds of traffic tickets are we talking about, and what potential action can be done legally to get that? Because that seems like real money. I mean, the fire department one is that whole problem, right, about insurance and...
And it was an inability. It was against charter that we could even refer those accounts to collection. I don't know if anyone from DOT is here to more effectively address that, but the bottom line really is with the ambulance, with the, delinquent traffic citations, they're under contract with a separate entity, separate agency than other city departments deal with. They've been dealing with that vendor for a number of years, and they perform a variety of tasks for them beyond just the collection of accounts. However, we are strongly in favor of and encourage them to not only utilize that entity until the end of their contract, but to utilize our collection agencies. We think that a multi-pronged approach can only improve the collections of those accounts.
I don't know if it's appropriate here, but maybe we have to get DOT to either report back to Transportation Department or to Budget on the various strategies that they're using, because I think that's real money.
I think with the report that was done on the 22nd, it lays out a variety of shortcomings from each department, not just the revenue. But I think the last time we looked into the DOT and traffic citations, it was pretty clear, as long as that contract is in place, there's little that they have the ability to alter. Now, when that contract, is it ACS?
That is correct.
When ACS's contract comes up for renewal or we go out to a RFP, then we have the ability to cause that secondary collection to be shortened, the period shortened, to go into secondary collection. But until that occurs, my understanding that contract is fairly airtight as to their ability to maintain those files for a much longer period of time than Department of Finance believes is equitable. So I think we've gone over that, but I think this report, because there's other things I forgot about on franchise fees, things like that that are LADOT, that we can get an updated report. Plus, I think the issue that you touch on very clearly is the area of departments, even when they collect delinquent debt, they're not putting a penalty or interest on those collections. And so it just, the whole system seems to be deteriorating as opposed to getting better.
We certainly believe there should be some standardization in how it's implemented. The rate of penalty, the interest amount that's charged, if in fact they charge interest. But there has to be some uniformity, and they have to be brought into compliance.
Okay. Just know this, I'm going to schedule it in DOT, let them know as an agenda item to give us an update on all the aspects of that issue. Just to make that clear. My last question is this the citywide non-tax amnesty program. How much money are we looking at from that, and how would this program work?
Two things. What we have the ability to do right now is those accounts that have already been referred to our outside collection agencies under the authority of 5.181, we can compromise the balances of those accounts. So we can utilize that to basically begin it right away. Now, there are some departments, of course, that have ordinances in place that may prohibit the application of penalties and whatnot, and that's part of what the city attorney is reviewing right now. But based on what we have at the outside collection agencies now, it's approximately $40 million, and we have $2 million budgeted in our budget this year in terms of revenue associated with that program.
I see. And how will this program work?
It is a couple of different mechanisms that can be used. If we do it in the traditional sense with our other amnesty program, we would have radio announcements. We would let the taxpayers know that this amnesty program has been initiated and that they have a certain window to take advantage of it to get a savings, I guess, on their liability, if you will. Now, normally, the way we enacted it before, because they were all tax accounts, we would waive the penalty, which could be as much as 40% of the overall liability. With non-tax accounts, they don't all use interest, they don't all use penalty, so whatever we're compromising will often be part of the principal balance. So we're trying to be careful so that we don't reduce it too much beyond the principal balance.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, a lot of these issues are articulated in that Macias report about a single point of collection? Is that where many of these recommendations are coming from?
Well, many of them were incorporated or taken from the Macias report. I think these are independent opinions sometimes as well, but we do believe that a centralized entity under one umbrella does help facilitate and move forward these initiatives more quickly.
I think they gave a figure, and I don't know how real it is, it's a couple $100 million or something that you could actually garner from having a centralized point as opposed to the decentralized that we're going through. And one of the issues that came to clear during one of the budget hearings is the process where even those that we send out to second collection, to send them back to the department after all that time seems to be a real waste of time, because if they didn't make any impact the first 6 months or a year, and then it goes to secondary collections, and then you send it back, it just seems like we're just basically shuffling paper. And at some point, if they can't get it from the secondary collections, it would look like that's where you bundle them and sell them as debt for pennies on the dollar. But just shuffling them back and forth just, I think, eats up a whole lot of time with little results. And so one of the things I think we have for this year is, in this committee, is try to look more closely into that Macias report and find out what we can address on the collection area, because we've had people recommend the collection sheriff in a variety of colorful terms, but I don't know if, how much money we've gotten with that. So that's something I think if we, in the other request I have on this June 22nd report, when you do the supplemental, it would be, at least from my perspective, very helpful if you'd make it into one report, so we're not going with apples and oranges, a supplemental and this report, and trying to figure out what's different amongst them. So if you could just give us a one report that updates it currently, it would be very helpful, I think, to the committee to understand what the departments are doing and not doing, who's cooperating and not cooperating, and what is the extent of the debt and the variety of debt that's not being collected.
Certainly can do that.
All right, so if we look at that 7B and also that updated June 22nd report for within 30 days. Okay. Those instructions will move to the next item.
Okay, the next item is item 8, which is City Treasurer reports relative to clarification of changes to the City of Los Angeles investment policy.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I think this is a kind of a cleanup from a previous action of the committee and the council. And I think it appears that there was a document that you created that didn't connect at council. So why don't you explain what the remaining item is?
Well, the remaining item was a direction to CLA, CAO, and Treasurer to report back on some concerns expressed about the composition and potential loss of institutional memory. We actually met within a couple of days and submitted the report, where the Investment Advisory Committee would always contain as two members, ex-official members, the CAO's office and the CLA's office. And that clarifying that the treasurer, based on the qualifications that were approved in the report, would make recommendations to the city council for approval of the city council and the mayor of the other members of the IAC.
And what specifically is the membership that you're recommending?
I'm sorry?
The specific membership of the committee.
Well, these were, and I don't have the entire list, but that the members primarily are outside the city to avoid the Brown Act. That the person has served in a senior financial management position in a county, city, or other public agency. The appropriate degrees of CPA or a CFA, a certified treasury professional or certified cash manager. The person would have managed an investment portfolio with a minimum market value of $1 billion or has served as an investment advisor for a portfolio with assets exceeding $5 billion.
Those are qualifications. How many members do you propose?
I envision between 3 to 5 members in addition to the CAO and CLA.
And the CAO, CLA are ad hoc, which does not put you into the Brown Act.
Correct.
Okay.
Just one question, and the controller expressed some concerns. I think there was an audit or something done, a report
Item
about
8.
the ability of the treasurer to appoint a committee that advises her or him, whoever your successor may be, and then you're also the chair of, so it's kind of like your in-house group, and the ability to say, of a member to say, I disagree, we want someone else to talk about this, and you're controlling it.
If I can address a couple of those issues. One, just as background, and I can enter it into the record, I am on my second state treasurer as well, or the state treasurer appointed me to the Technical Investment Advisory Committee. And we actually had addressed oversight committee, which is a much stricter standard than an advisory committee. State law vests the power to do investments with jurisdiction's legislative body. That legislative body, in this instance the City Council, then delegates that authority to the treasurer. At any time, if someone disagrees with how a treasurer is performing his or her duties, it's within the power of the City Council to call the treasurer to speak before the body. I think it's important to note that the treasurer is a fiduciary, and an advisor can advise, but at the end of the day, it's the treasurer and City Council who are going to be legally responsible for the actions. I think it is, especially because this is an advisory committee, the history is that the treasurer has been the chair of this committee since 1987. And I don't know of, I'm not aware of any concerns that have been displayed, even when the committee consisted of people who didn't know anything about investments. I know that I asked the assistant treasurer to, see if she could gather more information about the exact concerns, and since she spoke directly to the controller's office, I think she can address that aspect.
Yeah, I think we were a little confused when we got the June 14th report, because I know there was an initial...
Krista.
Oh.
Who are you?
Krista Binder with the Treasurer's Office. Sorry about that. Because there was an initial report from the Controller that cited a potential conflict of interest, I believe, if the Treasurer was the chair of the committee and selected the members. And I think that was an initial concern of the City Council as well. And so when we had gotten back with CAO and CLA, created the ex officio members, and then had the members recommended by the treasurer to the to the City Council and the mayor, we were hoping that that sort of addressed any potential conflict of interest. But in the June 14th report, they still cite that potential conflict of interest. So I actually did contact their audit staff to basically understand why they still felt that there was a perceived conflict of interest. And unfortunately, I didn't get any rationalization as to why that existed. So at this point, based upon what the treasurer said, we don't perceive that that's true. Daily investment decisions are daily. IAC meets quarterly. We have an investment advisor that does compliance. We have internal compliance daily. So to cite any conflicts, the City Council here gets the monthly cash management report. So we're still trying to sort of come to terms with what that potential is.
It would seem to me that the answer then is you have two independent bodies that are on there, although they're ex officio, they're there to listen. And if they found something externally out of order, they would report it to us. If you're familiar with the bankruptcy of Orange County back in the early 90s, whenever it was, 94, you had a treasurer who was investing very, very loosely the county's money, and by the time they had a chance to correct it, it was too late. So I think what you're saying is with these two people there, that transparency is there for the council and the mayor to see if somebody says, hey, wait a minute, what you're doing is wrong and your committee does it anyway. they're going to be reporting to us.
And I may add, council member, that the outside investment advisor receives transactions on a daily basis, has our investment report, as does the custodial bank that actually clears the transactions. And at any time, and in fact, our group recommended to the state treasurer, and it certainly happens in the city's environment, the treasurer is audited multiple times a year. So,
Well, I think it's someone.
oh, and I'm sorry, and we still maintain the AAA rating, the Standard
But, you know,
Poor's.
and Joy, I hate to see you go. I've already told you this. I have absolute trust in you. I don't know who the successor is, so I want to make sure that the systems are in place that we're protected. And, you know, if it's just you, I have no problem, but I don't know who the next person is, so.
No, understand, and that's why I called the state standard, because that's how I've operated, and in fact, there are controls that, because of the quality of the staff, they're nice to have, but they're imperative to stay in place, such as the external investment advisor going forward to give you that kind of transparency.
Farid Safarovid, Controller's Office. I just want to mention that Controller is in support of IAC Committee. In fact, we believe it is quite essential to have that committee in place. Controller raised the importance of IAC back in 2005 for the reason not meeting the new IAC composition. Again, the concern that Controller has is having a body that is totally independent from the treasurer, so they can provide independent advice. I believe it is most beneficial to the treasurer and also to the city that you have a body that is totally independent and is not influenced, nor the members are selected or recommended by the treasurer. I had a discussion with Assistant Treasurer with regard to the rationale that we are talking about. We mentioned that there are jurisdictions out there that they have IAC members, that Controller is an, Treasurer is an ex officio of the Commission and is not a voting member. There are cities like City of Orange that they have the IAC that Treasurer is not a member. City of Glendora and so on. Also, there are other jurisdictions that the treasurer is a member. But Controller's position is, in order to have an effective IAC committee, it is best that we have an independent that is truly independent from Treasurer's operations.
And I understand what's being said, but you have to be clear that the state law has a different, there's a different requirement at the county level. At the county level, state law dictates an oversight committee. Oversight is different from an advisory committee.
Yeah, I understand. We are not talking about an oversight committee. We know this is an advisory committee, and city is not required to have an oversight committee. But if we choose to have an advisory committee, it is our belief that that committee should be truly independent from Treasurer's operation.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to take that a step further. So what would you then constitute this committee to have as representatives to be effective?
Well, Treasurer has proposed a very set criteria, having well-qualified individual on the committee. That's excellent. That's the type of individual you want as a member of the commission. CAO and CLA as an ex officio also appropriate, that they have the history of the city. Treasurer can be a non-voting member of the committee as well. And that's how we are.
You'd rather they be a non-voting member?
Non-voting, yes.
What's wrong with that?
Well, first, they're providing advice, and they're for advice, there are no votes. I mean, it's advisory. And just so, one thing that I did do, I think it's important, and may be a consideration for true transparency going forward, that this committee may want to consider on behalf of the entire city council for these kind of changes. Call in someone who truly has to be independent, the CPAs, because I certainly know I talk to not only the city CPAs, to make sure that this is fleshed out, but other CPAs that service the public sector. Again, what I would hate to see is going back to when I came to the city in 2001, where there were members that were placed on the committee that really didn't know anything about investments. They thought that their job was to tell the treasurer what to do, which, legally is not permissible. There can be, I guess I would maintain that the advisory committee would have no votes. It's advice. For instance, some of the people who were interested when I first presented this idea in 2006, was like a Bill Gross, who headed PIMCO, which is one of the largest fixed income in the world. Those are the kind of people we want to bring to the table to make sure the city does not fall into this trap of just not moving ahead with the times. So, council member, nothing wrong with the treasurer being ex officio, but I guess I would just maintain that there's really no voting in an advisory capacity.
I'm just curious why the controller, Wendy Gruhl, is taking such a clear line, and we just get this on June 14th.
Just to make sure we have check and balance in place. If the committee at some point believes that they need to advise this body independently, they can do so in terms of being totally independent from treasurer's operation. Again, what treasurer is proposing is not unusual. I mean, the city's jurisdiction out there that they have the same setup. But if we are choosing an investment advisory committee, just to make sure there is a check and balance in place, just to make sure that your body would receive independent advice if they need to.
So even if this is an advisory group, you don't feel it's check and balance in
Yes.
Yeah.
what you feel?
Let me just ask the question, is that the fact that there's no voting, does that change the position of the controller's office, being that it's advice? Because one of the things I think we've struggled with this throughout the city, it depends on who they're advising. If we had a body that was advising this committee, then certainly you'd have it independent of the treasurer's office. But if you're asking the treasurer to seek advice on how best to invest the city's money, it's advice that she's seeking to run her office. And so it would appear inconsistent that she or her replacement not be a part of that body, and that they're functioning independent of the department.
If there is no voting involved per se,
Yeah.
and it's truly advisement to the city treasurer, yes, there would be.
That's my understanding, is that it's advice for the city attorney, the city treasurer, so it's advice. You're not voting on what to invest on.
Can't,
And I'm saying, but
Yes,
that's,
yeah.
you're merely, they're looking at your processes and giving you their best advice. You, as the treasurer, have to assimilate that advice and give the council the best advice you have and make decisions that come out of your department.
Correct.
And if every one of them disagreed with her, and she went and did the opposite, CAO, CLA are still there to come to council and say, we really think this is a bad decision.
Let me do, one thing I'd like to ask the city clerk, if we could have, just so that the file is complete, that's June 14th report from the controller. We can add that to council file so that if anyone's interested in looking at it. I would recommend that we move forward on the recommendations of the treasurer, but I'd ask that the clerk's report reflect the criteria that has been identified and also the makeup of the committee, so that it's clear how many people are on the committee, and that also I think it's important, at least from the documents I read, that in addition, if that committee felt compelled to speak to both the council and the mayor, they have to be approved by the council and approved by the mayor. So it does have checks and balances in that regard also. So if we can have that one report, committee report, reflect the standards that have been established, the number of people that are going to be on the committee, and those types of things, I think it would be very helpful.
It would seem to me you wouldn't want a number, that you want the flexibility to bring someone in if you need someone else in there.
I mean, the thing I'm just saying, if there's, you said 3 to 5?
3 to 5 in addition. You don't, yeah, that,
But the criteria is important, because I don't think you're looking for an army. You're looking, to replace whatever. So that's what I'm just giving us an idea of what the breadth and depth of the committee and what the criteria is.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to vote for it. I'd like the controller to explain it to the full council so I can get a better understanding of it. I'm confused at best here, so I can't vote for it.
So we have a vote on the committee. I'll say, okay, 3-1. We'll move this item forward with those directions.
Thank you.
And I think for the clerk, if we can ensure that we capture the essence of the discussion, that if as the treasurer has commented, if there's no voting, it appears that the controller has less concern to this level of objectivity. Okay. Next item.
May I ask you, so we have 9 and 10 we have to do with the election, and the 11 also has to do with basically a report on the department. Do you want to start with 11 and have that report and then go
I think
to?
if we just do 9, 10, 11 together.
Okay. All right. We'll just do them all together. 9 is the Board of Library Commissioner report and NCLA report relative to approval of ballot measure for citywide parcel tax to fund library services. Item 10 is the city clerk report relative to a cost estimate to include city ballot measures on the 2010 primary year general election. And then item 11 was the library department report relative to department operations and vacancies and the service impact of reimbursing the general fund.
Good afternoon. Martin Gomez, General Manager, Library Services. Members of the committee, I just want to start with number 11, if you don't mind, just to kind of give some context here. The request is what the impact of reimbursing the general fund would be on library services. That is actually playing itself out now as we speak. In the current fiscal year, the library department was asked to reimburse the general fund approximately $11.5 million for utilities and services from other departments, and that is being done. We, in that current process, we have been able to maintain our library services at 6 days a week and then 7 days a week at 9 sites. However, with the reductions in service or reductions to our budget that occurred during the year, such as the furlough as well as the ERIP, we had to reduce services even further, although that's kind of just a related issue. In the upcoming fiscal year for FY 10 and 11, the library department has been asked to again reimburse the general fund for retirement and benefit costs totaling approximately $10 million, as well as another approximately $12 million for utilities and additional overhead, for a grand total of about $22 million out of our budget. The impact that that's going to have will also have an impact on our service program when you couple that with the loss of ERIP positions and the 100 FTEs that are going to be lost effective July 1. In effect, what's happened then in this current fiscal year is we've gone from 7 days of service at 9 locations, 6 days of service everywhere else, to now only 6 days of service currently in the fiscal year, and effective mid-July, we will be reducing our library services to 5 days per week. So the impact then has been significant because it's real dollars that are used to fund our operation. If I might then, to go into the notion about the parcel tax, or would you like to ask?
Let me ask the CEO on, in the sense of that issue of the, how we reconcile those numbers of whether the 3-year report referenced a $10 million over 5 years versus this year's budget that talks about $10 million in this given year.
Jackie Wagner, CAO, Library Budget Analyst. In the 3-year plan for solvency, the proposal was to have the library reimburse the city for $2 million for their pension and related costs. Because of the financial situation of the city, and because of the charter required minimum that was required for the library, it was determined that after the elimination of the vacancies and the ERIP positions, that just approximately $10 million would be available to meet the target. It is higher than the $2 million, but it was, I think it was an amount that I think that the determination was made that the library would be able to afford that for the year.
So, I mean, is it 10 million, is it 21, if I understand it, 21 million a year for overhead and utilities as compared to 11 million for utilities and 2 million a year for overhead?
No. The annual, the cost for utilities is approximately 11.7, and that is the annual amount per se. It was for 2009-10. For 2010-11, it's projected to be 11.9 million. It was anticipated that we would only have the library pay $2 million for pension and benefits, but for this as a one-time, just for the 10-11 budget, $10 million was set aside for their pension and benefits costs.
Okay, now, what happens subsequent years if this is just a one-time? I mean, those are ongoing expenses.
Expect that it's going to depend on the formulation of the budget. Was not anticipating that they would have to pay the additional $10 million for the 11-12 fiscal year. This was, the mayor putting the budget together, it was just determined that they would set aside $10 million from the library's budget just for 10-11. So I anticipate that in the upcoming years, 11-12, that it'll go back to being $2 million for the pension and benefits costs.
What I understand is that if the cost for overhead is maintained?
The cost for overhead is approximately $25 million, and for benefits and pension costs, just for library employees, it's $25 million. To the extent that the library is able to secure additional other sources of funds, which I think is what we're going to discuss in item number 9, the general fund would continue to pay for their health and benefits costs.
So even for 10-11, having a $10 million for overhead, you're saying that the city's general fund is still absorbing 15?
Yes, the city's general fund is still absorbing approximately $15 million.
Okay.
Just for health and benefits. There are other additional indirect costs as well that the general fund absorbs.
So if 11 and 12 goes back to $2 million per year, then you're jumping to about 20-some million for general fund?
Yes, sir.
And that's not dealing with utilities, that's just the overhead?
That's just overhead.
Right, so the issue was, and so that there's reconciled, I guess initially in the 3-year report, there was thought that you could get through the fiscal year with 2 million, and that was for 9-10.
Yes, I think when the 3-year plan was put together, there was anticipation that they would phase this in over a period of time. As the mayor was putting together his budget and addressing the 492, the decision was made to ask the department to absorb more of their overhead costs, the pension and health costs.
But it's still, the city's still subsidizing?
There's still some subsidy, yes.
Okay.
Yes, as far as the general fund input on the library's budget, the library's total budget for 10-11 is projected to be $131 million. 126 of that is provided from the general fund.
Okay, that's their percentage of the property tax?
The percentage of the property tax provides their total operating cost, which is approximately $76 million. The difference, which is the related cost, is also provided from the general fund. The first portion, the charter required minimum, is calculated based on the assessed value of all real property. However, that money is allocated from unrestricted general fund dollars. So it's still all general fund dollars.
But I just want to clearly understand that. I just want to make sure that the 76 that you commented, that's their percentage, is part of the 131.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So,
yes, sir.
But the key is it's all general fund.
It's all,
that.
Yes.
Just that they have a charter guarantee.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And 6 million of that also is from our own generated revenue, library generated revenues.
So that's of the 131.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So the issue is, although it doesn't go in your favor, it's at least reconcile how the 2 became 10.
Correct.
Okay. So we can move on. Move item 11 is note and file.
Can I, just a clarification, of the $131 million total budget, we are actually reimbursing the general fund that $22 million out of that. So our operating budget and the overhead is only costing the city about $112 million. because we have the $75 million appropriation. We're giving back $22 million, and $6 million is our own revenue.
Okay. But again, I think when you say reimbursed, the entire amount is general fund that you're receiving, right?
Correct,
Okay,
but
so-
the actual cost of the 131 includes that 22 million. It's kind of like it's being double counted because we are returning that to the general fund.
Okay, but that's for specific usage.
Correct.
Okay, so you have 131, including the 6 million you self-generate, but your tab, as it relates to the CAO and the city, is to pay a portion of your administrative overhead and to pay
Right,
your
so
utilities.
22 million of that is kind of a wash. It's being double counted, if you will, because we're actually paying that back to the general fund. So it's going back into the general fund for use in other departments.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know, I'm just saying, but
It's
that's,
not double counted, it's
Yeah.
a different type of ledger.
yeah. it's-
Right.
It's an expense versus.
But I just wanted to bring that to your
Oh, no, we
attention, too.
clearly understand that. I just
Okay.
wanted, you said double counted, I wanted to make sure I was clear, because I was clear when I walked in, and then all of a sudden I was unclear. But the issue is that we clearly understand you're given money, and then you have to pay your bills, one of which is overhead, and one of which is utilities.
Correct.
All right, so we all understand, so the key is that you're given that ability in the sense of that overall 131, but there are certain mandates on the 131 before you can even open the doors of the library.
Correct.
Okay, without item, what is it, the 10 and 11, I mean, 9 and 10, they go hand in hand, right?
Yes.
Okay.
On item number 10, members of the committee, I just want to report out that the Board of Library Commissioners approved a recommendation from staff that we move forward with putting a parcel tax measure on the ballot for the November 2010 election. And that proposal, as it moves forward, would have to be completed in order to qualify for the November election. The language would have to be drafted by the city attorney's office and approved by the city council by mid-July of this year in order to qualify for the November election. This item has been heard by the Art, Parks, Health, and Aging Committee, and they moved it on with approval, recommended approval, and it was waived by the Rules and Elections Committee. As a result of that, this is now being heard before the Budget and Finance Committee. There has been an analysis done by the CAO's office, and that report, I think, has been included in your packet. I will defer to the CAO's office to respond to any of those issues. Just to mention from our perspective, we believe that the recommendation from the CAO to move this item to a 2011 either March or May election would decrease our chances of passing the measure because we expect, based on the comments I received from our consultant on this matter, that there would be a very low voter turnout. And my experience in having done this previously in another jurisdiction, as well as recommendation from our consultant, is that we would like to see the
Who's your
highest voter
consultant?
turnout. FM3, John Fairbanks, and the other three individuals, I don't remember their names right now, but that's who did the polling for us. And the poll, by the way, was conducted specifically with the notion of a November 2010 likely turnout of voters.
But going hand in hand, as you're rolling through your presentation, then the next question would be where the $4 million comes from to cause that to happen in November, where it appears it's almost free in March.
Right.
So I'm sure you have an answer.
Well, it's a trade-off, certainly, and I understand that it's really a policy decision from the City Council on with the appropriation. It's unfortunate that this item couldn't have been discussed earlier in the year so that it might have been budgeted appropriately, but in this case, it has not. And there was a recommendation also in the CAO's report about possibly having the library reimburse the cost of the election from the proceeds of that, or if we lost, then it would have to come from our operating budget, I imagine. That is a matter that, frankly, we have not discussed with the Library Commission, and I would feel that it'd be important for them to understand the ramifications of that before we actually take a position, or me to say to you, yes, we're willing to do that. I don't feel I have the authority.
What would that be in as far as numbers of personnel? That would be significant number of personnel if you impacted your general fund.
Depending on how the repayment plan was worked out, yes, or it could be. If it was one lump sum, it would be very significant. However, we projected that out over a significant number of years. We could perhaps minimize that by controlling our costs much more, well, we always do, but much more efficiently.
Let me ask one thing, the overall arching question is what is the intent of what we get for this initiative? What is it the library is going to do differently than what we can do now? And so just an idea of what that $30 million a year is going to pay for.
Well, as you heard, well, maybe I didn't say, but the parcel tax is expected to, the basis for the parcel tax is $39 per year tax on parcels in the city of Los Angeles that would generate a little over $30 million per year. That $30 million would be used effectively to restore 6 days of service across the city, so all libraries would be able to be open 6 days a week. That would also help to defer or pay for our overhead costs, which are real costs that go into the operation of libraries. So it would be to allow us to open our libraries and sustain our service program for 6 day service.
So you're saying you're talking about investing in people.
Correct.
To increase the number of hours in the library.
We are a people-intense,
Now, the thing that, when I was reading this, that was my biggest concern, at some point those people will outgrow the $30 million. And as we've seen in the past, particularly if there's a sunset on these funds, and even if it grows by CPI, you still have the prospects of growing beyond the $30 million, and then where does that put the library as opposed to where we've had some success is having bonds that paid for bricks and mortar and building buildings and structures and things of that nature. We're now saying let's invest in people that keep growing. And I'm just wondering, how do you reconcile that set a dollar amount with the growing overhead for people and their benefits?
If I might first speak to the sunset issue, to mention that the Arts, Parks, Health, and Aging Committee recommended that this move forward without a sunset clause on it. So that's, again, ultimately a city council decision.
But that's different than your proposal and the Rec and Park proposal.
Correct. Okay. Correct. However, with respect to the costs in the future, and that was part of the reason of the 5-year sunset, was to be able to adjust if we needed to adjust in the future. However, if there were no sunset, and this would be done anyway, based on my experience as a library professional for over 30 years, I believe there's some efficiencies that we could realize over time. There's a lot more automation that we can put in place. For example, a lot of self-check machine and equipment, which is very limited right now within the Los Angeles Public Library system. Other library systems are embracing this technology and go a long way to help us reduce our labor costs. I also would envision over time looking at a restructuring of our workforce that would allow us to rely on a different type of staffing scheme that would also help us keep our costs down over time.
And this is just one person's opinion. To me, it would appear it's a more sellable bond fund if you're talking about that kind of technology and being able to get from that more hours. If you're talking about restructuring and that those are fixed costs that over time you don't have to feed the pension and overhead. But if you're going straight people operational, it would appear it would have less legs from the public standpoint, because I think all of us remember bond funds we voted on that, one I keep thinking about is the $30 billion that we're going to fix the state budget. And the minute you voted on it, it was a $45 billion deficit. So some of those moving targets, particularly when you deal with personnel, it's difficult for at least to reconcile that, for me anyway. If it were dealing with technology and you're putting things in place and you're reconfiguring your workforce and as Mr. Rosenthal is going to ask you about volunteers, those things come about where you're fixing a fixed cost
Correct.
and they stay there permanently. Appears to be a better sale to me than saying, I'm going to just go buy more people.
Understood.
Yeah, well, I think on that point, you're not really a fixed cost because it indexes. So you're taking a percentage of the assessed value, and under Prop 13, that changes 2% a year. So you're indexing upward every year. You're getting more and more every year. The discipline factor will come from the city council and the department saying, we're not going to go out and hire a bunch of people all of a sudden because we got money. That's a discipline issue, and I'm not sure the voters have great confidence in us in fixing that. But I think as far as money goes, it will increase over time. So as the city grows, as assessment grow, hopefully, more money will come to the department. So I think that's, I have two concerns. One, I'd like to see the poll, first of all. My experience with polls is they're as good as the way you asked the question. And you're showing a number that is barely at the minimum with a 3% error factor that could be significant if the questions weren't and push questions and all. So I'd like to see that poll personally. And my biggest concern is the reimbursement to the general fund of the $4 million. Rushing it to the ballot in November is costly, and it's a gamble. Is there a way, and this is the question of the city attorney, can you write the language in a way that would say that the factor of the election would be reimbursed to the city general fund if it passes? If it doesn't pass, it's a gamble we took and lost.
Dean O'Connell, Deputy City Attorney. I just had initial discussions of this with our elections people earlier today, and if we could, I don't know specifically your answer. It's something that we could explore, and then by the time it gets back in the council, we'll have an answer for you.
I don't think we've ever done that before, but it would be I think it would be the wise thing to do because we don't have $4 million to throw around right now. And it's a big chunk of change versus waiting till March when the cost factor is virtually nothing. Yet I understand the political gamble is you got a much more conservative electorate, although as I looked at the election next year, although they even numbered seats up, there's more in the central city up for re-election than there are in the valley, which is the more conservative vote. And in the valley, there's only one contested seat. The rest are basically incumbents probably not having any contest at all. So I'm not so sure it drives the numbers in the opposite direction. But historically, it's a more conservative electorate in the March election. But that's a $4 million gamble at cost factor that if we're going to take it, I'd like to see a way that we get reimbursed if possible.
The other consideration is what we've heard from the CAO's office today is something that the library hadn't heard, is that next year that $10 million additional cost is going to go down to $2 million. And so that $8 million additional that's coming back to our budget could possibly, assist.
There's no.
I
wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say, I wouldn't guarantee that, given where
and I
the
was
issue.
finishing my question, my statement
not
exactly
your
to
salary
that.
on that one.
If that were to happen in the proposed budget next year.
A lot of ifs.
Well, a lot of ifs.
Okay.
Don't pay any credit cards at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't take that to the bank, right?
Was it?
So there is no dedicated, the revenue, let's say you get the additional revenue, it's not dedicated to any one purpose. It's going to go to your general operational costs. Is that correct?
Yes, however, within those general operational costs are a lot of programs that go on. So it's our after-school programming, it's our children's librarians, it's our book collection.
But there would be nothing in the ballot to say, if we get this additional revenue, it's going to go to these particular things. I mean, it's going to be general language, but it's not going to require it to go to those dedicated services, correct?
Generally speaking, you're correct. The only other thing I would mention to you is, as we did the polling, there were some very specific programs that were highlighted in the polls, in the questions that came back with very strong voter support for, such as services for the blind, and disabled, such as after-school programs for children, and homework help and literacy programs as examples.
But there's nothing to require that the money be spent on those. So
An oversight committee was recommended that they would stay true, but there's not a specific that says X% would go to this or that.
are you concerned that, should this pass, you get $30 million additional dollars following fiscal year, that this budget committee gives you less next year to operate, $30 million less, because Now you have $30 million new dollars coming from a parcel tax.
Good idea.
Well, let me clarify, we would ask them for perhaps additional reimbursement.
I'm sorry, what was that?
We would perhaps ask them for additional reimbursement. They would still get the required charter amount, so.
And that was my follow-up question, is you have a charter requirement, which is how much we discussed earlier?
Almost 76 million.
Almost 76
75
million.
million.
So now, with that, I mean, these are just issues I'm raising. Are you concerned about that? Have you put language in there to protect from that?
Well,
Look at everyone always asks me about our lottery dollars for education in the state. It's my understanding that, yes, we do give a lot more money through the lottery to education in the state, but that leaves less of an obligation from general funds to go through education because it's being covered by the lottery. So the same might happen here. And it's not the ill intent of this committee. I just think the realities are we're going to look at next year's fiscal budget and say, oh, where are we going to get the money? Well, libraries has 30 million additional. Let's put less there and patch up other holes.
The appropriation that we get from the charter is approximately 76 million. We're already paying the 22 million of our total related costs. Those total related costs right now are 48 million. So the general fund is subsidizing us about 20 million because 6 million of that 26 million that's left over is from our own revenues. So the 10 million would restore the positions, the after-school program. It would also increase, not substantially, but it would make an increase in our book budget. And then the additional costs will go to pay for the operating support of the library, the utilities, the custodial costs, security to maintain safe libraries. And so in order for the council to take that money from us, they would have to find additional costs to charge us. And so right now that money would be enough to almost self-sustain the library.
The 15 million for the overhead would be item A.
So,
I'm sorry.
Mr. Weiser? Yes, it may be possible, and I haven't had the experience in doing this, that there could be some language written into the ordinance that's brought back, or the measures that's brought back, that would perhaps require maintenance of effort on the city's part. So, there's a lot of ways for us to, between now and then, to look at some language that would help to, I would say, guarantee as much as possible. There are no guarantees in life, certainly, but that might be possible to tighten up the language there.
And looking at the bigger picture to the CLA and CAO, what other parcel taxes does the city of Los Angeles ask property owners to pay? We have fire, correct?
I don't know all of them, but I know we have stormwater pollution abatement. I'm sorry, we have all the bonds, yeah.
Other than bonds, parcel taxes. Now, not counting bonds for infrastructure, parcel taxes. Do we have any others? Well, this would be our first.
Well, you would have the assessments, like I said, you have your stormwater, you would have any street lighting, but,
Street lighting system.
yeah, but I'm not
Those
sure.
are,
Maybe we can report back on that.
can you report back on that? Because I get the feeling that the way our financing is going in California, there's going to be more entities going to parcel taxes. We saw it with LUSD. LUSD, for years, spot off going for a parcel tax. They prioritize building schools and building infrastructure over operational dollars. I think now they understood that they can't go in that direction anymore. There's going to be more pressure to put more parcel taxes on the ballot. So for us, we've got to prioritize internally. Is it libraries? Is it parks? What else is it? Are we anticipating any others? And if we get that information, we could assess for ourselves whether we are going to say, hey, we're prioritizing libraries to be the first one to go out there, but there's going to be other pressures as well. I think it'd be helpful to see not only the city, but all other parcel taxes, what is on a person's property tax bill. We could report that back before it gets to council.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, well, let me make a few questions. He wants me to do volunteers, which I will do, but let me just go through the numbers. You need a 2/3 vote for this, correct?
Correct.
And what tax are we looking at for the average person who votes yes or no on this additional tax?
Well, if it passes by the required 2/3, it would be $39 per year.
For what? For if I own an apartment building, it would be $39 for my apartment building. It'd be $39 for whatever the size of the parcel is?
Correct.
Doesn't matter.
Correct.
It's
a
just
flat
39.
rate.
Flat rate.
Okay. One of your goals is to hire people back, correct?
Correct.
Would they be people that were terminated that would come back?
According to the personnel, the layoff, and, Ray may even be able to speak to this, there's a layoff list that would be hit first, and those would be the first to come back.
And how many people would you estimate you would hire back?
There were 100 laid-off positions and 24 deleted resolution authorities. So approximately 124 positions could be restored with this.
And would we have a second tier in place so they come back with paying more to pensions and more to health care and a different program than the existing program?
No.
Well, I can't accept it unless we change our second tier. We can no longer continue to have a structural deficit that keeps us in this budget crisis. We should go up to 10% right now on our pension commitment, not talk about 7 in year 11 and expect to provide city services. So if we were to put this on the ballot, we need to have a second tier in place. Council has to go through it, and no new employee to the city comes on the payroll unless it's part of the new tier. Simple as that. If you slip by this, everybody's going to slip by this, and we'll continue to have a structural deficit of hundreds of millions of dollars every single year that we can no longer afford to do. Okay, so let's just be clear about the tier, okay? It would have to be a new tier. And I don't know if you put it in the legislation, ballot measure, or whatever, but we're not going to bring, in my opinion, I don't want to hire another person under the present tiered system, which is the structural deficit that we can no longer afford to have. When it comes to Rec and Park, are they part of this, or are they a separate entity? Why just the libraries, not Rec and Park? Why not DOT? Why not some of these other groups that are critical services to our city?
This was an initiative that was funded by the Library Foundation, and it was their decision to go out, along with my conversation, to do it alone. I did have some conversations with Parks and Rec early into the process, but they decided not to.
Is the Library Foundation willing to come up with the $4.5 million to put it on the ballot so the city doesn't have to put any upfront risk?
I've not asked them that question.
Why not?
They have made a commitment to help out with a campaign if indeed it does go to.
No, I want you to go back to them and get them to pick up the $4.5 million tab. It's very important that they pick it up, put their money where their mouth is, if they believe in this so much, should go on the ballot. Can we get that report back too, before it goes to council?
I can certainly ask them.
Okay.
Speaking of, I would ask you, could you give us an overview of when the timing for us to deal with November or March?
I was actually just thinking that question, too, and I was going to look at Karen. Is the deadline June 30th for November?
Yes. Yes, it is. The deadline is June 30th. The council would have to act on this decision by June 30th and issue instructions to the city attorney by July 14th.
But actually, it's June 30th is the last day to give the city attorney instructions. The last day to adopt the resolutions by the council would be July 14th. So there would actually be some time in there if you wanted to move forward. If you decided not to move forward in the couple of weeks following the June 30th, then you'd have that opportunity. You just wouldn't adopt the resolutions.
Could I actually provide a little clarification on on 2 points that were made earlier by the library? In response to the question about the positions that would be added back, the report from the library speaks about 328 positions that were eliminated in the budget. That's the equivalent amount that is also discussed in the report as $10 million to be dedicated towards salaries is the equivalent amount that was eliminated for those 328 positions.
So it's not 120-something?
No, it would be, to restore them to 6 days of service at the 64 branch libraries.
Correct.
And on the point of the elections, the survey was done with the November general election in mind, the November 2010 general election. However, the 4 jurisdictions that were successful in passing their parcel measure was done in June of this year, which is a non-general election. So that was one of the reasons behind our recommending that we go in March instead.
If I could still, with my questions, ask the city clerk to come up for a second. And I'll get to volunteerism, too. I've been a big believer that we shouldn't have off-year elections as a city. The cost of doing these elections is ridiculous, and the turnout is a disaster. Okay? It is. And I've been saying since I've been on the council, why can't we do it on even-year elections? And the answer always back has, they don't make ballots big enough, and they don't do the cards big enough. It's a problematic situation. But yet, at the last minute, if we want to put this ballot measure on, we can find an opportunity to put it on the even-year, elections. Do you have an opinion about off-year elections, meaning our elections are off years? Nobody votes. It's all those stupid handbills that get out that, make the democracy less than effective. Do you see this as an opportunity to put your toe under the tent about moving all of our elections to the general elections of 2010, 2012, or is this minus a minimum cost and not going to affect the ballot in such a dramatic way?
Before June answers, that would be appropriately agendized for another meeting. This really is just about the library parcel tax issue.
Well,
that's a bigger
okay.
issue.
No. This is on the ballot of this year that impacts the ballot physically that we've been told has always been an issue when you put it on the even years. So it's not going to the broader question. It's about physically using a ballot that's on an even year for something that you heard some of my colleagues talk about, the off-year election, when our ballot is as the cost of doing it is cheaper and all that. It's a direct question to you. You heard his legal advice.
Well, if I could just follow up. If an interested member of the public wanted to discuss or listen to this issue regarding off-year or even-year elections, they
Well, this
can
is
show
an
up
election.
when
Isn't
it's
this an
appropriate.
election and an on-year for an issue that's an on-year election, which we would normally have on an off-year that wouldn't cost us $4.5 million?
You're just carving out one word from this agenda into a bigger issue.
It's $4.5 million to put it on this year's agenda for our city.
All I will say is my advice would be to save this discussion for another time when it's appropriately agendized.
Thank you. Appreciate your thought. What's your take?
I would be glad to discuss this in as much detail as you wish, if you would want to make a recommendation.
Let me go back to you. Is it okay for you to do it on an on-year election, even though we as a policy have off-year elections for our election stuff?
I withhold my opinion at this point until the committee instructs me to prepare something that's thoughtful and well-researched, and I can present it to you instead of off the fly.
Well, I certainly want it before I vote on this issue, because if we can stuff something on this ballot, it raises the whole issue of our election.
Well, it's a good point that the CLA has brought up, that all that is required at this point is to instruct the city attorney to do the first step, the first stage in the election process by June 30th. The actual resolution doesn't have to be adopted for another couple weeks. I would highly recommend that we would use that time, and I would be able to come back to you and report in detail. So putting it on the ballot making the instruction to the city attorney at this point is not saying that this is something that you support. It's simply advancing it one step. You do reserve the right to rein it in at a later time.
Okay, fair enough. Last question on the actual ballot measure itself. The people are fed up with voting on measures and then robbing Peter to pay Paul has been historic on the state level and in other levels. What guarantee can you assure a voter out there who doesn't like to see the libraries close on a Sunday or their evening hours, that yes, this will go to it, similar to the attitude they had about the garbage tax, we used to call it for cops, whatever that was. But this is, again, another general fund revenue stream. It doesn't specifically say it will keep libraries open in the evening or on weekends. How do you get the credibility that if they vote yes for this, that they're going to get it and not just find the reduction in services or personnel?
Councilman, two things. One is we are asking for a Citizens Oversight Committee to be the authority to make sure that indeed the money does go where it's supposed to go. Secondly, as the language is developed for the ballot measure, that will come back to you, and hopefully that language will be satisfactory that it'll be tight enough to guarantee as much as possible that those dollars that are raised through this tax would be used specifically for library services.
Okay, and my last question is what Mr. Parks queued me up for, which is volunteerism. There's been a lot of negativity at me saying volunteerism, and some folks have said volunteers are flakes. You can't count on them. They're not reliable. They do their own thing, their own way. We did say, take a look at, there are retired librarians who are part of the volunteer structure. There are a lot of people who are very, I would say, gifted and talented and who believe in public service that are part of Volunteer Corps. And there are a lot of folks who really believe in education through the libraries who have their act together. Are you looking at making a volunteer program come in and complement paid employees so we can open up hours in the evening and on Mondays or whatever? How is that looking?
We're looking forward to presenting a report to you that would discuss how we're going to enhance our volunteer efforts at the library and the opportunities there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, a few things, and I apologize if I duplicate my apologies for being late.
There's a book fine for that.
I'll give you my 10 cents for the day. Did we talk about polling and whether the polling on this item is positive enough to make it worth putting this on the ballot?
It was mentioned, just to reiterate, our poll, which was taken between May 14th and May 18th of this year, which is a snapshot in time, indicated that likely voters in the November 2010 election, 68% of those voters would support this initiative. And as you know, this requires a 66 2/3 approval.
Yeah, which is sort of edgy. I mean, it means we know we have a shot at it, but not necessarily a good enough number to be confident without a very successful campaign that we can do it. I don't know how much we talked about the different choices of dates, but other than the fact that whether we can physically put it on November, obviously if it turns out that's literally not practical to add, that's another question. But otherwise, really the only criteria should be which of those two dates is more likely to be a success. And I don't know if we've had those conversations with political consultants, but you have pluses and minuses. Obviously, in a better turnout, your electorate in November is more likely to be open to a tax for something necessary like this. Your electorate in the spring is one that you can impact more because it's such a low turnout that if you have the ability to get out the vote in a campaign, that could be positive. So I don't know how much we discussed that or how much we've looked at that as an effort.
I'd be happy to repeat my position in reviewing the CAO's report. We respectfully disagree. We think that with the date they've outlined in the spring of 2011, we believe that we have, and our pollster consultant has concurred that we have the greatest chance of election if we go November 2010. And a very low turnout in the spring will only hurt our chances. However, if we had to, if the policy decision is to not move forward with this, then I would recommend that we would withdraw our request to wait until November 2012 election.
Okay, and I don't know if we have a city attorney with labor law expertise here, but I heard Mr. Rosenthal's suggestion. I wonder whether technically we're actually allowed to rehire people that we've laid off at a different tier if we've established a second tier. My thought would be that wouldn't be legal. That I presume for new people that we hired, that would apply, but for existing employees, that would strikes me based on my not total knowledge of labor law, but passing knowledge that wouldn't be legal.
I'm just here to validate your instinct that there's not an attorney here with labor law experience. But from what I understand, that there's a certain time period within which if someone is rehired, they're rehired back at the old pension rate.
That was my understanding too. So I'd want to be sure that as we look at that, we're careful not to plan to violate labor law since
right. And the discussion of the pension issue, well, first of all, it cannot be placed on the same ballot measure as this, because that would violate the single subject rule for a ballot. So we would save the pension issue for another discussion, much like I was trying to get us off of the other discussion. So.
Thank you, Dion. Do we have a second opinion?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And those are all my questions.
One of the things, and I think moving this forward, whether you agree with it or not, is important to get it before council. But I think from what I can pick from the discussion, there's about 8 or 9 questions that I think need to be highlighted for the committee report that at least brings some answers to the council. Mr. Rezar's question about current and prior historical issues on parcel tax. Certainly we need to know that as far as existing parcel tax and what our history's been in getting those approved. Also, we need to know, item 2 is what are this issue, what is it competing with for November and for March? What are the competing issues that we know about at this time? The other issue of the rationale for sunset clause versus no sunset clause, the issue of payment source and also repayment needs to be addressed as to what the options are. The issue of supplanting, which was brought up as far as how that would be addressed. Mr. Rosenthal's issue on the tiered system, how would that be addressed? The item dealing with whether these funds go for personnel replacement versus infrastructure, technology, and reorganization type issues. This item timeline for both November, March. The Oversight Committee certainly clearly needs to be established, and to what degree with that oversight. And then the issue of the volunteer status of the request through Budget and Finance during budget. Where are we on establishing a volunteer program? So I think in looking at that in the timeline, they've given us certain dates. We have until June.
Wednesday. Basically until Wednesday.
Wednesday. So it has to be Wednesday to give instruction, and by the 14th to give the approval. So we have to.
By June 30.
By Wednesday. So that we have a placeholder for Wednesday for that to be discussed, but we, I think, need these answers for Wednesday.
Excuse me, the placeholder is actually in for tomorrow, for Tuesday, the 29th.
Right.
Okay. So you said we need it for the Tuesday or Wednesday?
Tuesday.
It's in for Tuesday, but it could be continued possibly to the 30th.
Okay, all right. So we got the placeholder. But if we could get those issues answers so that they can be discussed during council, and then understanding the timeline of the 30th and the 14th for November. And so if there's any other, I think I tried to capture.
How's this going to council tomorrow? Is it going, no recommendation right now? Or?
Well, I think what I understand is that we recommend that it go forward.
Okay. Yeah,
without
then we'll
making a
discuss
judgment, making a judgment on whether we agree with the issue or not, but certainly moving it forward to be addressed by council before this deadline.
And Arts Parks did recommend moving forward with it, so what you could do here is move it forward as well, have the discussion in council, and then, as I said, that it's in council tomorrow. You could continue it to Wednesday. That's the last day to give instructions to the city attorney, and then the resolutions would have to be
I think it'd be very helpful on those 9 or 10 questions. If there's answers to those, I think it would help the debate.
Do you have a clarification of whether that will be heard tomorrow or Wednesday? Do you want
I
to?
think that the timeline is Wednesday. I think they've got a placeholder. Okay. If we do not have all the information, then there's a likelihood it could move.
So we'll let Karen know.
No, but we are going to discuss it tomorrow. That's
okay.
Because there's going to be not only this committee, but I assume other council members are going to have a number of questions.
Right.
And it's better to have them discussed and answered, and perhaps come back Wednesday if we have to move forward on it.
Okay, so we should plan on tomorrow.
We should plan on tomorrow.
So these answers would be helpful. Okay?
And for clarification, the committee's moving forward the CAO's recommendations?
We are moving, what is it? I guess we're supporting Arts Parks that I'll take it back. No, we're moving it forward as a committee for review by the council. We're not making a judgment as to whether we agree or disagree with the ballot measure, but we're moving it forward for council consideration, but asking these 9 or 10 questions be answered so that that could aid in the debate.
Okay.
Okay, so we move, thank you. So then, next item. So that's on item 9,
9, 10, and 11.
10, and 11. So we receiving,
Actually, yeah, 11, yeah, that's...
okay, and then also on item 10 is note and file, right?
Correct.
Okay, and so then item 9 were the directions we gave as to that issue. Okay?
Okay, next item is item 12, which is a CO report relative to the status of the request for proposals for the proposed partnering of cultural affairs facilities.
Okay, so item 12 is a report from our office regarding the RFP, or request for proposal process. It is, this report is outdated and has been heard in the Arts Committee. It is outdated because we have established a working group, and that working group is meeting to revise and update the RFP.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to verify. So this report's outdated, so that what we're relying on is the working group that will then come forward with culling out cultural affairs locations outside of the other 100-plus locations that the nonprofit
Yes,
policy
sir.
is moving on.
Yes, sir. On March 25th, the Arts, Parks, Health, and Aging Committee met, officially established the working group, and gave us instructions to report back every 30 days with the progress and status on the RFP, and also provided a timeline of 120 days to have that whole process be completed and finalized and the RFP issued.
All I would like to ask, and again, we could note and file this, is that who is on the committee, or the working groups?
Well, we're still establishing the members on the committee. So far, we have members of the various different council offices that are affected, general services, asset management, Rec and Park.
When you say council offices?
Council offices,
does that mean where the facilities are
CD4.
located?
I'm sorry?
Does that mean where the facilities
Where
might
the
be located?
facilities are located. So primarily CD4, 8, 13, 15, and 10.
Okay. Are you representing us on 8?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Let me just ask one thing. As it goes forward, whoever is representing the CAO that's pulling all this together, is that we not basically come up with a policy and an RFP that's totally inconsistent with the 5 years of work on the nonprofit policy?
Well, Monique attended the first meeting on June 14th, and she was very clear on that point.
Okay.
And so we are going to ensure that whatever morphs out of the nonprofit leasing policy with respect to cultural facilities, that there is some connection there, and that item will go before the Municipal Facilities Committee for approval, and as well as to the various different council committees and back to council prior to release. So there will be some connection, and it won't be one extreme to the other.
And the goal also was looking for ways, from our historical perspective, of moving these facilities off the general fund so that we're not responsible for ongoing maintenance and cost and operational, because that's where we fail. We've done a good job of repairing them.
Yes.
We've done a good job of finding money to restore them. We've done a poor job of maintaining them operationally. And so that's what we don't want to get into, is an RFP to where we're tied down on maintenance, repair, utilities, and things that we just do not have the ability to do.
Well, sir, I think your instructions and your comments will go a long way to provide us some guidance in that area.
All right.
Thank
So
you.
we'll receive a note and file item 12 and wait for that report. And let me ask you another thing. Is General Services still moving forward on answering the council's questions on non-cultural events or cultural locations?
My understanding is, yes, as part of this working group, and Saul Romo for the Department of Cultural Affairs, we did invite members from the CAO, the CLA, specifically so that their knowledge base on the nonprofit lease policy can be part of this discussion. We have the advantage, having a member of your staff who has the perspective of Budget and Finance Committee as well as an affected department office. They're still moving forward with their lease policy. We're taking into consideration all the issues within that lease policy in our working group, and we will take those recommendations to the municipal
I would
facilities.
suggest that the SCAO make sure that General Services is still answering those questions, because I think that's the bulk of the buildings.
Yes, sir. And our municipal facilities group is spearheading that effort, and they will be making a report back to the municipal facilities committee.
So we're working on the 110 buildings in two different ways.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you. We'll note and file that. Next item.
Okay, the last item is item 19, which is a CO report relative to a grant acceptance package for the County of Los Angeles Impact Program grant. This is a application that the city attorney prepared and submitted.
I think the bulk of the questions is that it's so late. How does that, I guess we've already expended the money for this fiscal year. Is this now considered a reimbursement?
This would be considered a reimbursement, yes, because
It's not being used to fill a budget hole or a gap?
while the money is being used to reimburse the general fund for expenses already incurred, and the assumption was that this grant would be, acceptance was part of the year-end FSR, so.
Okay, and then are they applying again for this current fiscal year? Do we know?
It's my understanding that they will be applying for 10-11 and that the amount of the award would possibly be the same.
Okay, what did we put in the budget for 10 and 11 for this program? Same number of people?
Same number of personnel. I think we estimated the grant award might be slightly less.
Do we know why it was delayed so much? Is that something on the city side, or was it from the county side?
I believe it was, the time delay was on behalf of CalEMA. They released the bid late. And subsequent to that, the city attorney's office had originally submitted a separate application by themselves. And when CalEMA reviewed their application and the county's application, they asked the city attorney and the county to partner together. And after that, that occurred in January of this year, I believe. And then a formal letter was received from the city that we were awarded the money in May.
Okay. If we could make sure that you give the clerk that timeline of what
Okay.
was the reason for the delay, and then also the information as to whether the department is applying for 10 and 11, and what that timeline is. And also, just so everybody's aware of it, if it can be just a brief synopsis of what the program actually entails and what some of its accomplishments are. So if we can have that in the committee report, I think it will aid everyone. But this is strictly a reimbursement of what we paid.
So it's a reimbursement. It's retroactive for this year.
All right. Any questions on that? Okay, we'll move that item, CAO's recommendations with those requested information.
And, Mr. Chair, because of the end of the fiscal year, we're requesting that this be placed on a special meeting agenda in council for Wednesday, if that's possible.
Whatever the timing. We just want to make sure.
I'll send in the request today.
It's just about the same size as that budget deficit that was reported last week, and I was just making sure it wasn't filling that deficit. It was really a reimbursement.
I think you're off the agenda topic, Mr.
You
Chair.
don't have to answer. Okay, is there anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.